So today we're going to be looking at a Volkswagen DSG transmission. This is the 6-speed, it's the DQ250. It can be found in Golf R's, Golf GTIs, Leon Cupras, S3s, TTs. It was their high performance one. They now use a DQ381, but the 250 is the one that we're focusing on today. We've had one dropped off by a customer that is struggling to select gears. So we're going to take it apart, have a look and see what's going on.
Welcome guys, back at Dan's bench. He's currently taking apart a O2E DSG gearbox. As you can see there from the little picture that's come up, you've got two output shafts, a twin clutch, Mechatronics on the side, and then mechanical gears as well. When you're working on wet clutch DSGs, you've got to be aware of what the fault code is and why that fault code is there in the first place. Lots of people will jump to the conclusion that it's a Mechatronic fault regardless of the fault codes. As you can see here, this is the power flow. So the flow comes in on the clutch, selects the gear that it wants to drive, comes down the output shaft and then through the diff that's at the bottom into both of the wheels. So like I say, these gearboxes have got a dual clutch at the front, mechanical gearbox with gears as you can see in that diagram, and then the Mechatronic is made up of hydraulics and is also made up of electrics. Common faults on these units are pretty much everything. You've got the clutch pack can fail, the mech can fail, internal gear failure, bearing failure and selector fork failure. All of these will display very similar fault codes. So as you can see there, the drive comes in on the clutch, select second gear, which is in the first half of the gearbox. So if you imagine where those gears are, in a straight line, you've got evens at the bottom and you've got odds at the top. So when you're selecting your gears, you've got a gear pre-selected. It's basically like having two gearboxes inside one, really. It's a really good design. What Dan's doing here now is he's taking off the Mechatronics cover. It can be a real difficult removal over the harness connector. There's a rubber seal on it and it can be corroded if the gearbox has not been taken apart before, and it can be quite difficult to remove. So these Mechatronics, we can repair them, we can also test them. We can test the hydraulic side of it, and in some occasions we can also test the electrical side of it as well. Some earlier models don't have a speed sensor, so what he's just unpicked there, you can see the wire at the top of the screen. Some later models do not have that in, the earlier models will have. So sometimes it can be quite confusing. You get a new Mechatronic unit and it looks like something should be plugged into it, and it's a blank. So what we're doing before we take it apart, and Dan's got his visor on so he doesn't get covered in oil all over his eyes and face, is we will air check the forks to make sure that they are moving. We do this on automatics as well. We'll always air check the clutch packs up before we take them apart, and you can just see if there's any air leaks going past or if you have any selection issues before you're taking the box apart. Diff cup coming out. Make sure the planet gears don't spin. So these planet gears can rotate. You've got to make sure they don't. Oil's quite clean. Customer had a go at giving the repair to themselves. So it's got brand new oil in it, and hopefully it should have a new filter in it as well. Yeah, that looks fairly fresh. And this is why it's just very important to make sure that you're identifying the fault codes in these vehicles. Oil pump shaft goes all the way from the front of the gearbox all the way to the back of the gearbox where the oil pump is situated. And these bolts can be an absolute nightmare for stripping. They're a multi-spline and they're always so tight. rear cover, so this is where the oil pump is situated, and you've got speed sensors in the back here as well.
Go.
And that's the oil pump now that it's taken off. Remove the casing, get a good look at what's going on inside. There you go. So you can see on one of them selector forks on the right hand side there's actually a ball bearing stuck to it. As these are, there you go, as these are a magnetic field sensor, if something's covering it, the fork's not going to move. And there you can go, that fork is not sitting straight in its hole. Quite a heavy gear set, so it's nice if you've got an extra pair of hands to help you take it out. It saves you breaking any of the forks. But there you go, so these are ball bearings on them selector forks. You can see at the top there, it didn't have any of the ball bearings left on it. Oil feeds, reverse, input shafts, and there we go. So what Dan's putting back in there now is when you sit in, first of all, air checking the holes, they fire up an actuator, and the actuator hits the fork and pushes the fork up into the relevant gear or down into the relevant gear. Where that ball bearing wasn't sat in there, the fork wasn't sitting straight, so it's pushing it up at an angle. And what that was doing, the sensor on the Mechatronic unit was picking up that the fork wasn't moving in the right direction at the right time, and that was flagging up a fault code. Grease up the bearings before they go back in, especially if you've cleaned and washed the oil off. It's just nice to give them a little bit of protection before the oil gets circulated into the gearbox. Again, if you've got an extra pair of hands, it always helps lifting it in with two people. It's very important you don't damage the speed sensors because the selector shafts and the selectors have to come down at a certain angle. And if you nick one of them speed sensors, if a gear's not sat properly, it's just a nightmare. So lift it down with two people if you can. There we go. All the selector shafts, selector forks sitting in the right position, all greased up as well. Ready for the top casing to come back on. Just painting his grease onto the bearings again. Also helps when you're installing the casing over the top of it. Grease up the filter O-ring as well, make sure that that doesn't get stuck on the way in. You don't want to nick that because otherwise you won't get the correct oil pressure going to your relevant gears. Sealant being applied then, ready to put the back casing back on. Rear casing going back on now then. Make sure you've got all your forks lined up and the bearing lines up. The bearing's got a cutout on it as well, so you've got to make sure you get that lined up. Some people leave it in the back casing, it just depends how you want to take it off really. Diff cut back in, these are sprung loaded, so whenever you're installing them you've got to put a bit of weight behind you. There we go. Circle it back on for the reverse idler shaft. Clip back on for the bearing. Oil pump back on. Checking by hand, making sure that everything's in properly. Dual clutch pack going in now then. Clip going back on as well. And the oil pump shaft going back in the front as well. Put the circlip back in. They've made this look easy. Sometimes it can be really difficult. There we go. New front cover going back on. And circlip going back on. Making sure the circlip's in its groove. So speed sensor's going back in. 30 Torx bolt. Cool. So what you would have done before we've probably not filmed this part is we would have air checked to make sure that the selector forks are applying before he puts the Mechatronic in, and he also would have air checked the clutch as well. So depending on what the fault code is and what the job is, this was a repair for a local garage, we would have also stuck the Mechatronic unit on test and tested it. We didn't have to in this case because we knew that that wasn't the issue. And we try and keep the cost down for the local garage as well, so that they can pass that on to their customer. Putting all the lids back on, and then this is not far away from being completed and gone back to the customer. Filter housing back on. And there we have it. A selector fault repair to a DSG O2E, also known as a DQ250. Thank you very much for watching.